But in general, feed quality is pretty bad in the industry, right? That's, you least cost formulation, and then you try to get the throughput in the feed mill. And so there's a variety of factors that are playing against having really high feed quality.
Hi and welcome. I'm Kate Malash, your host for this episode of the Poultry Podcast Show. Joining us today is our guest, Dr. Kelley Wamsley. Dr. Wamsley is an associate professor in the Department of Poultry Science at Mississippi State University. She completed her undergraduate studies as well as her master's and doctorate at West Virginia University. Her research program focuses on poultry nutrition with an emphasis on exploring the nutritional implications of feed manufacturing. In addition to her research, Dr. Wamsley also teaches undergraduate and graduate level courses in feed manufacturing, broiler production, and poultry judging. Welcome, Dr. Wamsley.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks for having me on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. And we're really glad to have you. Before we get started talking about, your research program and everything that you've got going on, could you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to be a professor at Mississippi State?
Sure. So I don't think that my story is very unique to many, compared to many other people in our field. Growing up, I loved animals. And so I think the obvious thing that you think when you love animals, you're going to be a veterinarian. And so I'm from West Virginia. While poultry is the number one ag commodity in West Virginia, I didn't really know that much about it. I just knew I liked to eat chicken, right? And actually, if you look at the county that I'm from, which my students will always make fun of me about, then I relate back to this, it's kind of shaped like a chicken. So if you're curious, Raleigh County, look it up. But so it's kind of ironic that I'm from that county and that I started working with poultry. But I went to West Virginia University to pursue animal science degree, and had done the typical thing of volunteering in a vet clinic to try to get experience. And my undergraduate advisor was Dr. Joe Moritz, and he's still at West Virginia University. And we were talking about, how I could set myself apart in a vet school interview. So he's like, well, your grade's pretty good. If you think you can work pretty hard, then you can try out for this, apply for this summer undergraduate research experience. And so that summer, we did a lot of work at our organic farm with pasture poultry. And, you let the birds out every morning at 7 a.m., put them up at 7 p.m. And then also really dove into his feed manufacture research. And very manual labor, as you know. And so I finished that summer and I thought, oh my goodness, I've never, I'm not applying to vet school. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So kind of didn't look back, went through that trajectory, and he gave me a great opportunity to participate in research as an undergraduate, present, go to meetings, stay for my master's, and then my PhD. And so then when graduating, I was looking at the different options that were available, and I really did want to go into academia, but wasn't sure if, should I start out right away? Should I go into industry, get some experience, and then come back? But I was really interested in making sure that wherever I went, it was a really good fit. So this worked out at Mississippi State. I work with a great group of people, and I've been here 10 and a half years now. It's crazy. Time flies.
Wow, that went by really fast. Your story is very similar to a lot of stories we hear about folks who end up in the poultry industry, that a lot of us loved animals to begin with, thought, of course, the only career I can do with animals is be a vet, and came to discover that there's a whole host of other careers that are actually, I think, even more fulfilling than veterinary science would have been. So that's great. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
In your time through your academic progress, was there any moment where you felt like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? And if so, why did you keep going?
Absolutely. I think that everybody, if you're doing your graduate career, right? You've probably questioned your path a couple times. But, and I think for me, it's and probably similar to others. It's just whenever, things get overwhelming, so many different things going on, pressure, of just putting things together, especially whenever you're finishing up and getting, all the writing finished. I was like many, writing is not my favorite, but I love getting the information out there and it's needed, and especially in an academic job. But, sometimes it's a little bit hard to get started. And so, especially during some of those stages and just trying to do that last push, or when you've got a lot of projects going on and, then you've got schoolwork to do. Then, those are the times whenever you're just, you're tested and you have to really, put things into perspective and think, okay, this is now in the moment, right? And think about where you've come from and what you've been able to go through that you think was really challenging before, but you were able to go through it. and then you were happy on the other side of it. So, I reached that point at several points, in my graduate career and then in academia too. But I think we all do.
Oh, yeah. I think we've all been there. I am certain, given the number of students I know listen to this podcast, someone is listening to this while having a mental breakdown in their lab right now. So to that person or people, hang in there. This is temporary. You can do it.
It is. And yeah, absolutely. Not to make light of it, but it gets tough sometimes. And just kind of being able to get yourself in your happy place, and maybe what you need to do is really just disconnect, and, do something for yourself for a little while, or a day or weekend or whatever, a week maybe, and then just kind of recalibrate things. But I think, what I always tell my students and what I do for myself too, if it's something that's really challenging, testing you, then I just, I like to write things down, making notes to be able to say, okay, specific things where you overcame, a challenge, because then, you can think about it, right? But when you can actually physically see it, it puts it a little more into perspective.
It's really good advice. So you mentioned that you've been at Mississippi State for 10 years now, which I also can't believe. 10 years have flown by for me as well.
It's okay. We won't talk about that.
As soon as you get out of school, you blink and it's gone, man. So in your last 10 years, looking back, if there was something that now that you could take back 10 years in the past for your past self, does anything come to mind?
That's challenging. I think that the biggest thing is just, it's okay if you don't know, and you have the tools, and not everyone knows everything, right? And so, the smartest person in the room is the person that knows what they don't know.
I love that.
And so, I think it's okay not to know something, and you can always find the answer. You have the skills to be able to do that. So
that's great advice. Sometimes the best thing you can do is ask for help, but I think a lot of us struggle with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's hard. I think about, I know students, sometimes they, struggle with coming to, their professor and asking them for advice. And they think maybe they, won't understand, or, me personally, even just thinking about, calling to people in the industry. People are really busy. Everyone's really busy. And so sometimes I feel really guilty to call somebody up, and everyone's always so welcome, and everybody wants to help everybody. You hear it so many times, that, people say, chicken business isn't just about chickens, it's about people. And, that's really, really true. Everyone that I've ever interacted with are, the most genuine people. So, I think that's what also helps to make our jobs so awesome, and really enjoyable.
I agree. That ability to collaborate across different sectors of the poultry industry and academia is wonderful, and honestly kind of makes your day to if we call each other, and sometimes it spurs you to think about the issues going on in your work a little bit differently, to talk with someone from outside of your workplace for once.
Absolutely.
So I agree, reaching out is always a good thing. So in your teaching career, how would you describe your teaching philosophy? And if you could tell us a little bit about, does it apply differently to undergraduate students versus graduate students, or are there some general themes that you bring to all of your student interactions?
So when I was in school, I took some extra courses to get a certificate in university teaching, just because it was a new program that was offered, and it wasn't, didn't add too much to my schedule. And in that course, or in that program, through a series of courses, we kind of covered the scientific background about how you learn, and trying to put presentations together in the best way where you're always, you're making class interactive. It's not just lecture, because the majority of lecture is forgotten within the first 60 minutes. So, I use clickers in the classroom and things like that, but always just thinking about the big picture too. And so I'll try to preface lectures and saying, okay, there's going to be certain terms that you're going to have to 100% memorize, right? But you're going to need that foundation to then be able to make connections with, other material. And then also being able to, there are going to be new things that pop up once you graduate and that you didn't learn at school, right? But if you're taught, some problem solving, critical thinking skills while you're in school, those skills can be used, in your job, because you can solve any problem then if you're learning to think critically. So I don't really just think about, teaching for the test, but trying to give students, other activities, written responses. We get popular press articles in the classroom. I have a lot of guest lectures that come in. And then, to wake people up for a second, we go through and kind of do a little bit of a review with clicker questions and make sure that key concepts weren't missed before we move on too far. So I think really try to push on my students as far as, I feel like I can push them. It's really important for me to know the students. And so more than just pushing on a graduate and undergraduate level, or a difference in teaching between those groups of students, it's really the individual that I try to kind of have a range of trying to meet where they are at.
So we've seen kind of a nationwide trend towards fewer and fewer students enrolling in poultry science programs, specifically in agriculture in general. And some of this is just a cultural shift where fewer and fewer people are growing up on farms and have an interest in those sort of things. What kind of tactics do you think we can use to, reach out to that pre-vet student and inform them that there are other options in life? Or, even more challenging, to reach out to people growing up in the city, because we're going to need to start recruiting from a larger base to fill the needs that the industry has.
Sure. That's a great point. I mean, yeah, we've got to feed the world's growing population. And I mean, chicken, why not be chicken? I mean, we're poised, very efficient, and we're poised to be there to be able to feed the world. So COVID, I think, was really hard for the industry, right? Personnel, across, all sectors that everyone's involved with. But so poultry, we weren't immune to that, and poultry science departments and kind of these kind of degree programs where it's really hard sometimes to sell chickens to people who don't know that much about chickens. And for us, we really like to try to show, for our department at Mississippi State, we like to show that we're, family atmosphere, open door kind of policy with faculty. And so you really need somebody here on campus to fully appreciate what we have going on. And I know other poultry science departments are, they're kind of facing the same challenges. If you can get somebody in our door, I feel like, we have at least a better chance of getting them than not, right? And so, different universities are going to streamlining processes, I guess, and recruitment recruitment and with advising. So kind of restart, but so different universities are going into these procedures to kind of streamline different processes like recruitment and advising. And, while it looks great on paper, right, because you have less people involved and maybe some more continuity, it also takes it out of, that connection that we get with the students. And so that, I think that's really important, and that's something that we're going to have to kind of relook at. And also I think that, if many of us that are in the field, and I know that I talk to, or in the industry now or in academia, we weren't all just the absolute best students. I wasn't. I mean, I did great in high school. I did pretty good in, college, but I got so involved and loved, the research aspect that I was just like, well, I'm not, I want to devote my time to this. And if I was only judged on my ACT score or SAT score or, GPA, then, it might be a little more challenging for me to get where I am today. And so I think that's something that's really important, because you have universities that are also capping enrollment and, have some pretty high requirements to get in. And you could be, really excluding, some really fantastic talent. Luckily here at Mississippi State, we're not faced with as many challenges like that at this time. I hope that it continues to be that way, because it gives more people an opportunity, right? And I think everybody deserves an opportunity and not just being judged on, a couple numbers.
I agree. Really, the best researchers are the ones who are hardworking and passionate, and GPA doesn't have a whole lot to do with that.
Yeah. I mean, right. I mean, we need to learn statistics in school, right? But applying it in a research setting and using a poultry model for what we want to do for the rest of our life versus something in engineering and a statistical, model, learning how to, to analyze data from an chemical engineering department or something like that. My kind of mindset is which can be kind of closed-minded, I guess. But if it's one thing that I have to work on, but if I don't see that there's a huge amount of value in something like that, it makes it a little more difficult to do it, right?
Well, I think a lot of us feel that way. I don't know that that's closed-minded so much as it is practical.
Yeah, I definitely I'm glad you feel that way.
It seems like we would benefit from having, and especially statistics is a great example, more targeted and tailored coursework, especially on the graduate level with statistics, where I don't necessarily need the graduate level stats courses from the statistics department, but I do need a really solid bioinformatics and biostatistics foundation to be able to do research correctly.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I was fortunate, now picking on statistics, I guess, but I did have a really good professor in grad school in statistics. His name was Dr. Turk, and he came from our college too, so on the agriculture side, and to try to make sure that he was kind of, it was taught, not in the ag side of campus. It was taught downtown and on West Virginia University campus. And so, we're coming from working at the farm. You got feathers and, a little dirty, maybe a little smelly. And you can usually see a buffer zone around you of people that can relate. I think a lot of people can relate. But, even he knew where we were coming from, and he wanted to teach to us. And so he got data from us and used examples in class for others. So he wasn't just doing, engineering type studies or, things that we couldn't connect with at all. And so, that's, an example of a good teacher, I think, too, just being able to try to make what you're teaching as relatable as possible so that people can see the real world application in class.
Yeah, those professors are a godsend. I know I would not have made it through all the statistics courses if my professor didn't understand that I had a completely different background than the math majors in that class,
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's, we need more of those for sure.
Yes. Yep. I agree.
Well, switching gears from teaching over to research, could you tell us a little bit about your core mission for your research program?
Sure. So I just think that for me, there are others out there doing a great job, but we have a pretty applied research focus. And so, trying to work with the integrators, allied companies out there, and whatever kind of issues that they're facing or that are, the next questions that are coming up, just trying to be able to work with them to be able to solve those problems. And so the reason why I love my job is, one, interacting with the students, but also being on, some cutting edge research that is also really applicable into industry. And so you have that direct impact on, the chicken that you're buying at the grocery store. And so I've been involved in a lot of different things, but a lot of enzyme research, amino acid requirements, and looking at, nutrient density of diets and, what's most economical depending on, the grow out of the bird or the type of genetics. And kind of my projects that I do on the side that I'm more passionate about are some feed quality work. And that's something that's not necessarily going to be funded through some of the same kind of funding sources. But it's, if I've got some money together and I try to be able to apply for sometimes internal funds or whatever to be able to kind of keep that research going, because it's something that's really important, often not thought about. I know you guys have had Dr. Pacheco on this program, and he does a lot of great research in the area too, and Dr. Fahrenholtz, and there's Dr. Moritz that does a lot of research in this area, and others. But, they're becoming more and more of us out there that are doing this type of work, but connecting. So not just thinking about nutrition or how to formulate the diet, but thinking about what happens when you pellet it, because, the majority of commercial birds are fed a pelleted diet, at least from broilers and turkey standpoints. And so feed's already expensive. You're adding this other cost on top of it to make it even more expensive. And so, genetics are changing. So it's a really important area.
It is. It's an extremely important area. And like you mentioned, not one that we have, a lot of extensive literature on. All of it's relatively recent and building on each other. I noticed your lab is really focused on investigating the effect of feed distribution systems on the segregation of the feed particles and therefore the nutrients. That's really important work, but also a really complex problem to tackle. Could you tell us a little bit about your approach in researching this in a university setting using commercial feed lines, and a little bit about what your research has shown so far?
Sure. Yeah, that's something that we've done in the past couple of years. And it was really interesting. It's just kind of following up the work from some work that Sheila Scheidler did. And it was just a very small research or extension article, I think, that was published in 1994 saying research or pelleting is important, I think. And she just did some proximate analysis assays from feed sampled at different points along the feed line and found that segregation occurred. And she, measured pellets and fines separately and then found that segregation occurred. And so we wanted to follow up that work and see, okay, can we repeat that? And what does that look like on a commercial scale and much larger scale? Because it was from one, I think there were two different feeding systems maybe that she looked at. And then, but still it's an instant in time. So I collaborated with West Virginia University on that too. And so with Joe Moritz, he sampled around integrators in kind of the Northeast, and then we sampled around integrators around in the Southeast, and just to try to have a really comprehensive snapshot at looking at different operations to see what feed quality or, looking at beginning feed quality, and then sampling throughout the house in a couple locations. And so, that requires you to get on farm, right? And then you kind of have to time it to see if you've got to empty feed pans and then get the feed system to call for feed, and then, make sure the birds don't go over and eat it and run in there and take samples. And then we sieved the feed, separated pellets and fines, and then sent them out for analysis. And we were looking at amino acids and, approximate analysis just to see what we could find. And so we found some differences. And so we wanted to really kind of follow that work up and then see, okay, but what does that mean bird performance wise? And with varying pellet qualities, can you, overcome it from a standpoint that would be practical in the real world? It's one thing to say, okay, we changed, we found, X percentage of difference in lysine at the beginning of the feed line versus the end of the feed line. But does it matter to impact, feed conversion ratio or the bird weight and processing, breast muscle, accretion, so on and so forth? And so what we did, we're fortunate, we have 2 commercial houses that are located adjacent to our research farm. And so we're contract growers. And in between flocks, we were able to get feed that was manufactured in a variety of ways, looking at liquid mixer added fat and a liquid phytase that was added in the mixer, and then looking at post-pellet application of the liquid phytase and of fat. Some fat was added at the mixer as well, but the rest of it was post-pellet addition. And then we created different feed treatments, like a 55% pellets versus a 75% pellets. And then augured all that feed into the feed bins. And then we had to figure out, how much feed had charged the line to be able to get it to call for feed and fill the whole feed line. And so doing a lot of background work and timing it all to be able to set it up to know how much feed that we needed to put in the feed bin. Because, of course, that also feed of varying feed qualities, Winowinski's done some of that work, and he's spoken about it and had some popular press articles on it. But feed segregates in the bin. And so do pellets come out first, or does mash come out first, or, what ratio? What does that look like? And so we started seeing that, and from sampling at different points along the feed line, we started seeing that pellets are coming out first, and then feed quality, as it makes sense as feed goes along the line and is augured throughout. There's mechanical forces, frictional forces that help break down that pellet, and mash, actually, the fines fall out into the feed pans. And so you see a big dip in feed quality towards the middle of the line. And then you see the kind of survival of the fittest, I guess, that pellets kind of make it towards the end. And so you see more of that when you have higher quality pellets too. And so, whereas I think in some cases we had almost 90% pellets at the end of the feed line for that high feed quality diet. And so we also found that, segregation does occur, regardless of the method, but it was a little more extreme with post-pellet application, which makes sense, right? I mean, you're applying it on the outside of the pellet. And so if the outside of the pellet is breaking down, then it's just going to start to fall out into the feeders. We actually did see some differences in performance between birds that were fed at the beginning of that feed line versus the end of that feed line. The reason why we know that is because we took, so we raised the feed lines up in that commercial house. And then after the feed was augured throughout, we'd stop it. And then we'd go through and empty every single feed pan on that line and then collect the feed and kind of simulate like a half house brooding. So, in the one phase, birds would be feeding out of this set of feeders. We also know birds don't move around a lot in a commercial house, right? So just trying to see, okay, what does uniformity look like? And does this amount of segregation that we're picking up from lab analyses, from wet chemistry, does it matter to the birds? And we did see some differences.
Did you see differences in the nutrient profile, or were there differences in the ingredient composition, like certain ingredients tended to go with the fines? I would imagine that post-pellet applied enzyme probably ended up with the fines.
Yeah, it was. So, for example, the post-pellet enzyme, and then also the fat, because that's what's added on the outside. So, crude fat was a little bit increased in the fines in those areas too.
Interesting. So the birds that eat the fines, and we all know that birds don't really like to eat fines, but they're probably getting a higher energy diet if they're getting that fat. That's interesting. Very interesting. Does particle size of ingredients play a role in this?
So there's a lot of, there's some work that's been done recently in the particle size of ingredients. And we know, and my lab hasn't been doing that, but Dr. Pacheco has been doing some of that work. And Dr. Abdullahi at Massey University also is doing some of that work. And so, they've shown, looking at not just the macrostructure of the pellet, but looking at the microstructure of the pellet, then that has bigger implications on digestibility. And that once the feed goes through the pellet mill, that you're actually seeing a reduction in, particle size, ingredient particle size. My lab, we've been kind of focusing on just feed quality in general, and not looking at the ingredient particle size as much. We've been trying to look at the optimal feed particle size for starter birds. So from that kind of 0 to 18-day range. We got into that kind of in a weird way, I guess, or an unexpected way, like a lot of research, right? So we started out doing some of this late feed quality work in my graduate degrees. That's in some of the undergraduate research that I was involved with Joe Moritz at West Virginia. We were looking at, what does it mean to feed high quality pellets, and what are practical ways that you can manufacture high quality pellets, even in a commercial setting. And to really try to find out the true impact, we looked at a lot of those later stages in growth. So after 28 days or so, because, obviously birds are consuming a lot more feed. So some of those benefits of feeding pelleted feed, like decreased prehension time and energy, and so on and so forth, you'd be able to see, really true performance differences at that time. And just an extreme example. And so we focused in those ranges and followed up looking at different commercial genetics even, and found that, we see improvements in performance even from just a 50% versus an 80% pellet, and up to, I think, 8 points in feed conversion ratio, and improvements in body weight. And so then we wanted to look at, okay, well, we know that it makes a difference. So how can we, look at what is the optimal feed quality? And, then people can kind of, decide, okay, I'll be able to make, they know in an individual situation what kind of feed quality they can make at their mill. And so then be able to kind of look at the research and get some kind of more information on what to expect. So not changing anything really in formulation. And we started out to do that. And when we did that, we found that it was just so complex because we started looking at it from a starter, grower, and finisher and carrying things on. throughout all of the phases. And we found that starting feed quality and finisher feed quality interacts to give you differences in performance in the birds. And so that's not what we expected. We kind of expected that, if you start them out on a poor quality feed, you might be able to recover things in the end if you give them a higher quality feed. But it was a little bit different from that. And so what that had us do was really break down and look at the individual growth phases individually. So we then went through and started designing some starter feed studies. And so, just thinking, okay, let's manufacture one common feed, right? High quality feed, and then make varying sizes of crumbles from it. So running all the feed through at the same time. So it's kind of, the only heat treatment kind of difference would be whatever kind of frictional heat that's, imparted in crumbling the feed. And so we fed that to birds, and we looked at feed particle sizes, I think from 1,200 to, let me kind of start over for a second. Yeah. Okay. So we looked at manufacturing these common diets, and we looked at different feed particle sizes ranging from 1,200 to 2,200 microns. So we did kind of as an informal survey, taking some field samples, and saw that the average crumble particle size in the field was about 1,200 to 1,700 microns. So we kind of want to cover that span, but then go bigger and see what, was the optimal crumble particle size. Not kind of, not worrying about anything with ingredient crumble or ingredient particle size. And so what we found was that we thought, at those bigger particle sizes, you might see that performance is hurt on those day-old chicks up to, 18 days. But we didn't. We just found that, performance improved. We had differences in body weight and differences in feed conversion ratio. And so we thought, okay, well, maybe we just didn't go big enough because, thinking about looking at requirement for amino acids, for instance, you want to go way below the requirement, right? And you want to go above it, and you want to see where that plateau is, and then your requirements, around there or before it. And so we didn't get that plateau. We didn't see or any hurting of performance. So we then went back to the drawing board and then did a wider range of particle sizes, going from like 1,200 to 3,800 microns. For reference, 4,000 microns is what's typically qualified as anything bigger than 4,000 microns would be a pellet. So we went almost all the way up to pellet. And again, we saw that performance kept, improving basically when you fed those larger particle sizes. We never saw that feeding that 3,200, I think it was 3,700 microns. We never saw at that high end that we hurt performance. So we're like, okay. We make terrible, not all feed mills, but in general, feed quality is pretty bad in the industry, right? That's, you least cost formulation, and then you try to get the throughput in the feed mill. And so there's a variety of factors that are playing against having really high feed quality. So I thought we started thinking, and okay, so what if birds can consume pellets in the starter phase? Or we have really poor quality pellets anyways. If we only need to grind them a little bit with a crumbler, we can increase our starter throughput, which is a big, bottleneck in a feed mill, and then also save on electrical energy used by the crumbler. So, maybe not just feed straight up pellets, but let's break it down just a little bit and not go as small as what seems to be fed from our assessment. And so we designed a study based on that and trying to select sieving feed every day. My students loved me. We did this project over the fall football season. And, we sieved out feed, varying feed qualities to try to, we had to varying feed starting qualities, and we had to sieve the feed before we place it in the feed pan. And then we had to collect the feed each day and then sieve it afterwards. And so what we were looking at was trying to figure out, okay, when did birds start picking those larger particle sizes? We had some treatments that included pellets and some that included variety of crumble particle sizes. And regardless of the feed treatment, we found that birds were going after those larger particle sizes, even at the day of age. And really what we were finding was that birds were consuming feed, trying to think of the particle size.
This is great and fascinating because I get a lot of comments about there's too many pellets, the crumbles are too big, the crumbles are too big. We tend to freak out about that more so than the fines.
People get really upset about that. And I mean, I know that in the field too, that people, that feed is delivered. Like if feed accidentally gets delivered into a starter feed and they accidentally get pellets, and people think, okay, well, the birds are going to waste feed, right? They're going to start maybe eating litter earlier. And so then you might have issues with necrotic later because of that. And and that may be, but our birds were on, used litter from our commercial houses. And they had some really high quality pellets. I think it was 95% pellets in one of the treatments, and hard, big pellets. And birds were playing with them. You could see them pick it up and kind of play with them, and they'd break them apart. And I thought, well, and you could see some of the pellets in the litter. Yeah, so obviously we're eating the litter, but we really, and of course it's a pen trial kind of setting, but we have houses that are, set up to try to mimic commercial production as best as possible. And we didn't see really any disease issues. And the birds still, even those fed high quality pellets, still did well in performance, and really their performance wasn't hurt. And that's not only just looking at 18 days, that in these studies that we've been doing, we've then followed it up and fed birds, all of the birds, common grower and finisher diets. Because of course, you can make a difference in the starter phase, but does it really matter if it hurts performance in the long run, right? So we try to make sure that all these studies we've been following up like that. But so what we found was, we did look at, in this initial study we're talking about, we looked at 2 genetic strains, also high yielding and fast growing chicks. And we found that birds that were high yielding, they consumed average feed particle size of about 2,500 microns from that 0 to 18 days range. And then fast growing were about 2,200 microns. So pretty big. We've since followed it up and looked at more research and, some of the older research that was done with looking at bird preference and particle size. A lot of that's been done with ingredients, not as much with, pellets and crumbles, or overall feed particle size. And, if you talk to people, and ask them, why do we crumble feed? It's because, birds can't eat pellets. A day-old chick can't eat pellets. And that's because they don't have the beak size to be able to do it. So we need to crumble our feed to make it to be able to meet bird beak capacity. But if you start looking in the literature, you can't find hardly anything on beak size. Most of anything that's been done has been done on layers with beak trimming, some with songbirds. And so that's what we kind of moved into, designing another trial and looking at, okay, if this is true, if it's bird beak size is what's the limiting factor in what particle size that you can feed, what does that look like? And between birds, how do you get, birds with different bird beak sizes? And to start out with, to be able to kind of test that hypothesis. And does it really impact the feed particle size that they prefer? So we designed a study doing that with 10 little individual feeders in each pen. And we, doing some background research beforehand, for some preliminary research, we looked and we obtained chicks, just, a wide variety of chicks. We weighed the birds, measured their beaks, and it looked like, very clear connection that bird weight was pretty correlated with bird beak size. And it makes sense, right? And so then we're like, okay, well, how do we induce that for a study to really test that in the bird beak size? So we thought, okay, if you get chicks from different breeder flock ages, that's one way to get different chick sizes starting out. So that's what we did. We got chicks from breeder flock age that were more pullet versus breeder flock age that were more late. So we had small and bigger chicks. And sure enough, beak sizes, small for the small birds, larger for the larger birds, right? And what was really interesting, at 18 days, we saw no difference. Even though we found differences in beak size still with the birds, we saw no difference in what their feed particle size preference was. And so it was really, really interesting. So I think while we know that from the older literature that birds had these mechanoreceptors in their beak to be able to kind of to select the feed that they're picking up, I don't think that the bird beak size matters as much as just let's see what is feasible to feed the bird, right? It's feasible to produce in your feed mill. We still couldn't kind of relate back to be able to kind of see birds consuming really, really big particle sizes of feed, like in that 3,800 microns. They were given either a choice of what feed. So they were given ranges from all the way up from a mash all the way up to 4,000 microns. And basically all those sieves in between of different particle sizes, each feeder got each different particle size. And then we rearranged that every single day in the pens. And so birds were going after some bigger particle sizes, but it was still more up in that 2,000 and a little more micron range. And so we also gave birds a no choice, still in the 10 different feeders in other pens that were all randomized, throughout the house. And they started going after the larger particle sizes, and they consumed a larger particle size than the birds that had a choice. So I think that's interesting in itself. So if you have, and that's where I think the distribution of the feed particle size matters. If you have some varying ranges, then the birds can kind of self-adapt and get into the point wherever they're able to eat larger feed particle sizes. But still, even within a couple of days, they're still eating, consuming feed that's around that, much larger than a 1,400 micron, just average particle size. They're not consuming mash. Like we talked about earlier, the birds, even at day of age, they don't prefer mash. So I think we still have kind of scratched the surface. And then whenever you start adding into the fact that, okay, your beginning ingredient particle size, then is reduced in your overall particle size after pelleting. And most of that reduction in size happens in the pellet mill itself, not from just crumbling feed, from some of the data that Pacheco has. So kind of bringing all those things together, it's such a complex story. And we're just scratching the surface. And I mean, I don't know if we'll ever know the answer, but those are all the different pieces of us, working in these different areas and trying to, and that's the importance of collaboration though, too, right? And talking to your peers, they're doing some of that work, but then also not only in academia, but also in industry, to making sure that, what we're doing is actually relevant too. That's important. So we're really excited about this journey. We haven't found the optimal starter feed particle size yet. With about 4 or 5 different studies, we still haven't gotten there. But we're still on the journey. So, but we know, yeah, it is. It's very complicated. And then, then you just think about different diets. And I mean, you throw in so much, and feed processing, dye thickness, pressure, moisture. There's so many things, that can be changed. And so that's why it's so important, even in just doing feed quality research, that you try to standardize as much as possible. So if you can standardize your feed processing and then making your feed treatments from that commonly manufactured feed, or, trying to isolate differences between, the impact of feed manufacture on nutrient digestibility, right, versus, feed quality. So it's such a complex area, but that also makes it really fun too. Also sometimes frustrating.
I can tell you enjoy working on this because you are tackling this very complex problem and designing these studies that I have to say are nothing short of masochistic, as far as having to go away and sift feed and empty feeders. And your students, I can tell your students must love you as a mentor, because they wouldn't do it if they didn't,
I know. Well, and I do try to be out there during the time period. So, my husband's not as happy with that. Maybe he is, because I'm out of the house, but I do try to make sure. I mean, I ask a lot of my students, but they're awesome, and I'm so fortunate to be able to also. And sometimes, different faculty here in the department and their students, will be pitching in when we need all hands on deck. And I've got another crazy experiment that's looking at optimal feed particle size. They know that, okay, it's going to require a lot of work outside of that Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 time period. And, for some reason, I've been able to schedule it during football season a lot, and then summer vacation time too. And, but, we'll get there. But I'm very fortunate to have a great group of students and people around me to help make sure that we get this research done right.
Well, we're very fortunate to have you doing this research. I mean, it's something that, like you said, controlling for all those variables is not really something we can do on the industry side. And this is an important problem, and really highlights why we need to question some of the assumptions we have, such as the assumption that, starting chicks need to have a very small particle size feed. It may not necessarily be true. And there's a lot of benefits to maybe changing that kind of idea. So really appreciate you working on this very complicated problem so that we don't have to.
Well, thank you.
So before we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to tell us about what's going on at Mississippi State, or things you're excited about in the department?
Yeah, thanks. Really, absolutely. We have, those of you that know our department, I'm from the outside looking in. It's been a little hectic. We've had a lot of transitions going on. And so we've had new faculty come, which are amazing, new young faculty. And we have a new department head, Dr. Ken Macklin, coming from Auburn. And so we're really excited about our trajectory in the department. One of our new faculty is Dr. Tim Bolts. And so his training is in feed manufacture, broiler nutrition, and feed hygienics, which is something we didn't talk about, but feed hygiene is really, really important. And so I'm excited to have him on this team, and our team, because we've been working on trying to get a new feed mill. And so we've got a lot of industry support out there, and we've had a feed mill advisory board, and we've got some great donations that have been coming in. we still have some more fundraising to go, but we're really excited about the project itself. Not only to be able to enhance our feed quality research like this, but also to be able to expand our curriculum. I teach a course of feed manufacture, as you said, but I don't have a lab associated with us because we don't have a pellet mill that we can take students in to be able to train them. We use other resources to be able to do this kind of research. Luckily, we do have USDA ARS, and they're great partners, and we partner with them and pellet our feed over at their feed mill also. And Auburn has helped us out quite a bit. But we're looking for being able to also give hands-on experience for our students because we're training, tomorrow's industry leaders. And to do that right, we need to have, be able to maximize the amount of hands-on experiences that they can do. And so Tim and I are also looking at revising some of our curriculum to add 2 additional courses that relate to feed manufacture and feed mill management to have a concentration in that area, and then also be able to do some training of industry because we know that a lot of the feed mill managers today are coming from places that not in a feed mill. And so don't have much of a background. And so we want to be one of those resources in this location that we can, in the United States, that they can come to. And there are many others out there that have some training programs going on, but, that's time, distance, and money from a company and from a person. And so if we can be in someone's backyard and help train them, and give them high quality training here, that's what the kind of the niche that we would like to fill. So really excited about our department in general. I mean, we've been in a brand new building for the past 2 years, and just a lot of great things going on with a vibrant young faculty, and they all have dynamite research programs. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, that's so exciting to hear. I'm glad to hear that the program is growing and thriving, and so exciting to have a new feed mill on the horizon. That is definitely something that is mission critical to support the future feed mill managers for the industry. If I had $1 for every time I've heard the industry complain that there aren't enough people with hands-on training coming out of school, we probably have enough dollars to build that feed mill. So
that's true. So if you could do me a favor, just start collecting it. And then
yes, every time someone complains, we'll just put $1 in a jar.
Yeah. And then everybody else who's listening, please do the same thing. And then just send it over.
Well, we do it, but it is something that would sincerely help the industry to have students coming with more hands-on training. I'm glad that Mississippi State is making that a priority.
Yeah. Thanks, Kate.
Just one last thing before I let you go. We really appreciate your time. We ask the same 3 questions to every guest on the podcast about resources that you rely on. The first of which is, could you recommend any resources in your field? So having to do with poultry nutrition, feed manufacturing, or honestly, with teaching as well.
Yeah. So one of the resources that I would recommend, there's a chicken nutrition book, I think that's out there, and a broiler nutrition book. I think that's by Rick Klein. He's at least one of the authors. I think that those are really good practical books that I've utilized a good bit. The AFIA puts out like the feed technology manual. It's pretty expensive, but it's been a good resource for me as well. Plus, just popular press articles. I think it's really important just to, have your thumb on, just general areas, even if they're not specific to what you're doing, knowing what the hot topics are in the industry. So depending on where you're at, you can at least talk a little bit about what's going on and have, it's not just brand new news. And then I would also say, one book that would be really good is Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Successful People. I think I'm saying that right, but that's a great book. Also, we've had a lot of our graduate seminar courses that have been kind of centered around reading that book.
That's a great idea. How about something that is unrelated to your field? So this could be something fun or something that you find enriching personally, podcast, book, TV, anything?
I don't really read that much outside of, just, well,
I don't know how you have time. You have to sieve all that beef.
that's right. You'd think I'd be a lot more buff from doing all that. But I would say, so one thing that I like is Adam Grant. I follow his podcasts and some of the associated podcasts that he promotes. And I think it's called Work Life with Adam Grant. And so I don't have a long commute. My commute's like 5 or 10 minutes in the morning, so I don't really listen during those times. But if I'm on the road or something like that, I like to pull those up. Or if I just want to sit at home and listen to a podcast, that's kind of what I'll do. A lot of the time, though, I'm reading a lot of other things. And so I don't really read for fun, except for like memes, I guess, on Instagram.
Hey,
memes
really on Instagram count as enrichment.
That's right.
If that makes you laugh, if it makes you smile and brightens your day, it counts.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I think that you gotta have fun no matter what you do. So
exactly.
But I think Adam Grant's podcasts and some of his ideas on what, leadership and kind of different things about motivation. And if you get, burnout at work, he just has a lot of different related podcasts and write-ups that are really relatable to anybody, regardless of your area. And so I do that. And I listen to a lot of music, really random music, like everything from under the sun I like to listen to. I like one of my favorite things to do is when we process birds, I have all the students that are coming from processing, I have them submit 5 songs, clean 5 songs, and each, or if we go on a road trip, and then I build a playlist out of that, and then we get to listen to everybody's different music preferences too, and then I try to tell them not to do any sad songs. I want stuff that's upbeat, motivating, but sometimes some of those songs slip in, but I like to just listen to music. And
that's a fantastic idea. Why didn't I think of that when I was processing birds? Man, and just a great idea to get to know each other's music. Sometimes it's hard to kind of break out of your rut with music and learn some new artists, or maybe I'm just getting old. I don't know.
No, I have the same problem. So, or maybe I'm just getting old too, but
that is
keep me young.
Yeah, exactly. So you kind of already touched on this, but the last question we wanted to ask is, if you think about someone who is successful, and this could be in work or life in general, what do you think makes a successful person?
I think, somebody that's level-headed, right? Mm-hmm. And somebody who, not necessarily, the person who got all A's, but somebody who has grit, determination, and is just hardworking, and has some critical thinking skills. I think that's somebody that's what kind of success, or characteristics of a successful person. I think that's what you're asking for.
Right.
And so, I think those are some of the really good qualities that I see. And somebody that I would say would be successful and passionate about what they do, right?
Yes, for sure.
Because you can listen to something, if somebody can talk about air conditioners. And I don't really care that much about air conditioners, except for as long as mine works in the summer. And actually most of the months in Mississippi, I need my air conditioner work. That's all I care about. But somebody coming and talking about like the mechanical, workings of an air conditioner, I'm not, really that into it. But if the person is passionate, you can get you can get a whole audience of people on board listening to, that boring topic. No offense to anybody that really cares about air conditioners and how they work, but
yes, it makes it much easier to learn when someone is passionate about what they're teaching, for sure. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was a great conversation. You've given us a lot to think about, especially on the starter particle size thing. But we really hope to have you back on the podcast again to give us an update on all the changes in the poultry science department and the progress on your new feed mill project, and also an update on your research in the future. I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for everybody for listening. Thanks, Kate.